Okay, so hello everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the first session of the Industry Leaders Talk Series in 2022, hosted by the New York Institute of Technology's College of Engineering and Computing Sciences. My name is Babak Beheshti, Dean of the College. This talk series is co-sponsored by the IEEE Region 1. Our thanks go to Dr. Greg Godowski, the IEEE Region 1 Director. I would also like to thank the College of Engineering's Dean's Executive Advisory Board, particularly its chair, Dr. Robert DeFazio, who has been instrumental in organizing this series. Please note that this talk will be recorded, and the recording link will be made available to you in a follow-up communication. Today's industry talk, leader talk, is titled Building a Unified Global Team. This talk is given by Bill Zucker, Senior Vice President and the Baseband and SoC Development, System on a Chip Development, Unit Head in Nokia's Mobile Networks Business Group. Bill previously was the Baseband Platform Unit Head, assuming that position after the Nokia acquisition of Alcatel-Lucent in December 2015. In his current role, Bill leads a global R&D team that is responsible for developing all the baseband hardware products with the associated platform and transport software for Nokia's wireless portfolio. In addition, Bill's unit is responsible for the development of all the SoCs, systems on the chips, used in both the baseband and RF platform products in Nokia's wireless portfolio. Previously, Bill held various senior management positions in wireless R&D at Alcatel-Lucent and Lucent Technologies. In addition, Bill spent 5 years in the late 90s as senior executive responsible for various aspects of R&D and product management at Spectrian, which was a cellular RF power amplifier company located in Silicon Valley. Without any further ado, I will pass it to Bill. Bill?
All right, thank you very much, Dean Beheshti. Appreciate that introduction. And I'm happy to be here to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about, building a unified global team. I see from the registration list that at least one person I've actually worked with before as part of my team. It's good to make that connection again. So let me share my screen here and get us all set to go. So a little bit about myself before getting into the gist of the talk. So I'm a native New Yorker, born in Brooklyn. I'm an electrical engineer by trade with a bachelor's from Manhattan College in the Bronx, go Jaspers, and a master's from MIT. I've been in the telecom industry my whole year, and I joke with people that since my mother put me in school early, I actually got out of college in 1979, so I'm now in the telecom industry for the 70s, 80s, 90s, zeros, 10s, and 20s, 6 decades. But over my career, I've actually worked only in 2 companies, and I'll put 2 kind of in quotes. The Bell system and its successors, Bell Labs, AT&T, Lucent, Alcatel-Lucent, and Nokia. And as Dean Beheshti also mentioned, Spectrian, a small public company in Silicon Valley from 95 to 2000. I've been the leader of many functions over the years, R&D, CTO, product management, marketing, and also served as a general manager for a small business unit. I love traveling, and between work and leisure, I've traveled and visited over 50 countries. My work teams have been made up of people from the US, Canada, China, the UK, Poland, France, Germany, and Finland. And I've also worked closely with people in my extended teams from Ireland, Greece, Korea, and Japan. Personally, I'm an organizational development fanatic since I was first introduced to Myers-Briggs behavioral models in the early 90s. For those of you who are familiar with that, I'm an ESTJ, or an extroverted sensing, thinking, judging person. I'm a big fan today of organizational tools, of which we'll speak a couple of during the session. Like from Accenture, they have a tool called the Change Map, or the Global Transformation tool, and an Insights Discovery profile by the Insights Group. Personally, I believe that creating unified global teams working towards a single common mission is the only way to achieve business success. However, getting there can be quite the challenge. First, a couple of slides about my company, Nokia, and a few introductory points before we get into the meat of the presentation. At Nokia, many of you have heard of Nokia as a brand and think of it as a mobile phone, which was a strong part of the history of Nokia. I'm actually from the part of the company that works on mobile infrastructure. And our tagline and mission is that we create the technology that helps the world act together. So we're focused on critical networks, deliveries, telecom networks through technology leadership and trusted partnerships. Well, in this age of telecommunications, at the core of all of the ways we interoperate and collaborate together, you'll find a telecommunication network that is essential to being successful on a daily basis. So we had a new CEO come in about I think it was a year and a half ago, Pekka Lundmark, and one of the things that Pekka wanted to introduce to us was a thing called our essentials and how we should feel about working with Nokia. What do we want our customers to experience? And he brought with him 3 areas of focus: openness, fearlessness, and empowerment. And they've been very successful in pushing these themes inside the company. Open, you need an open mindset, a continuous focus on renewal, and a transparency in sharing information. Fearless, feel free that you can challenge and embrace experimentation with respect of people and without fear of failure with respect to the experimentation. And empowerment. My view is that always authority follows accountability, and an empowered environment, you have both the authority and the accountability necessary to get the job done. Also, one of the interesting things over the pandemic the last couple of years is we've moved from a culture that was very heavily dependent upon working in an office environment, in a lab environment, to a distributed environment. I had during COVID, I actually had several places where hardware engineers had labs set up inside their house to do testing. We've gone through a very extensive redesign of our networks, our T networks, to be able to handle flexible working practices. And the world is never going to be the same with respect to flexible working arrangements and more time in virtual offices. And I think this is just a precursor to ensuring that you have the right capabilities and the right focus to be able to build global unifying teams whenever many of these teams will not be often face-to-face as often as they had been in the past. Okay, on to kind of the key points of the presentation. I'd like to start with a question that I always ask people that I interact with around strategy and culture. And it's the famous Peter Drucker question, does strategy eat culture for lunch? So from my perspective, strategy and culture must interact in harmony to create a sustained success. You actually can succeed in the short term by pursuing a strategy that is less than optimal, by doing what you are doing better than anyone else, by focusing on operational excellence. You can succeed in the short term and possibly the intermediate term by having a great strategy that gives you an early mover advantage, but implementing it poorly. But in the end, the poor implementation will catch up to you. But to create a sustained success in your organization, you must have an aligned culture around a workable strategy. An aligned culture can only be achieved when you have mastered the skills to create a sustainable, unified global team, a goal that is elusive and takes continuous personal investment and follow-up. So one of the tools I mentioned in my introduction was the Accenture tool called Change Map. We call it the Baseband Transformation tool. Let me bring up my laser pointer to help here a bit. So this chart shows the progression in my baseband team from 2017 through 2020, after I took over when I came into Nokia. And this is one of the areas that we use to focus in on what are the areas of necessary improvement, both globally and then locally. And if you see in our very first session back in 2017, we were in the zone called struggling under pressure. And in cycle 1, we actually had 23 teams that were either off track or unsustainable, with only 8 in high performance. And over the years, we've moved up to yes, but, good, but not quite there. And then the last 2 years, in May 2020 and October 2021, we've been in the cruising zone here. And the way we've gotten there is by having a clear understanding of what are the global improvements we need to make for the team, plus a very large focus on the local areas of concern. And you can see over time, we've now to the point where, we've got 47 of our groups in high performance, 19 on track, and we've only got 2 that are left unsustainable. And those actually were in areas where we unfortunately had a bit of a force reduction during the year. So it was clearly understandable what the issues are. So we use this very carefully every year to track performance and to look at what we need to focus on here. The key that makes this successful for us is also, this is not driven by top down, but the improvement actions that are put in place are truly a combination of bottoms up feedback, bottoms up participation in the activities that we engage in, and a top down commitment by management to address those areas of concern. And one of my favorite sayings that I always use with my team for continuous improvement is onwards, ever upwards. So any of you that have companies or involved that are looking for some sort of a tool to help you look to how to most effectively make a transformation journey, I highly recommend this tool from Accenture. They have a database that is globally with a lot of companies in it. So I can't remember the exact number, but it's substantial. And the results that you have from your surveys get compared against companies globally here. And it's really an excellent tool. So what are the key building blocks for a high-performing unified global team? And I like to go around the circle here as we put the pieces of the puzzle together. First, starting up here in the upper left, a single common mission. It is really clear that you must have a single common mission amongst your team to have everyone aligned. If you cannot get to that point, you're doomed to failure in the beginning. And then once you have a single common mission, then I focus on thinking global but act local. And you could hear from my comments around the change map survey beforehand that that is the way we approach it. You need to think about how do you act as a global team, but when it comes to the improvements in under that umbrella of a global team, you must have a local action plan to be able to ensure that you've got excellence in the local areas. Alignment on a level of commitment and accountability. We'll talk a little bit about this in the slides to come, but I find that even in highly technical industries like mine, a good portion of the problems are really around alignment and communication between a level of commitment that's been asked for versus what's been delivered, and a personal differences in the terms of accountability versus responsibility. Next, and this is a technique that I use, and it's got to be used carefully because it can create more complexity. But I focus on creating interdependencies between my leaders and teams across the globe while maintaining clarity and accountability. So for instance, if I have seven or eight director level organizations in all the different countries, all of my individual directors, of course, have their direct line responsibility for their teams, but they also all have some sort of a global responsibility. For example, one of my hardware directors is responsible for the overall hardware processes across the entire organization. One of my software directors is responsible for all the software processes across the globe. Another software director is responsible for our software evolution strategy of how we're going to continue to adapt to the new software methodologies that are out there. Another example is competence development. So what I try and do is force my direct reports to not only think of their own organization, but be able to understand how we're operating as a global team and look at the strengths and weaknesses across the entire team so we can have a much better discussion on how to improve ourselves as we go forward. Next one is cross-functional teamwork, no silos. It's very important that we have cross-functional teamwork. So I like to mix up my teams with people from different organizations. We focus very heavily on understanding the entry and exit criteria when we cross boundaries between organizations. And there is no, I will deliver if the other person delivers. We look for joint plans being put together by cross-functional teams, so we don't get into a situation where we have plans that are competing from two different organizations and you can't figure out where the risks are. Next, variation in meeting and types per audience. One of the key things for effective operation is being able to communicate with people in the way that they best receive information. And so we have everything from Zoom to Teams meetings, videos, Teams chats, email exchanges all lined up. But I think it's very important that you have a variety of communication methods available, and that your prescribing of which communication methods are done in a way to take into account the consideration of the receiving community. Because many of the times in a global team, English is not the native language, and so figuring out what's the best method of communication is highly essential to having a high functioning team. Next, fair work distribution. One of the things we try and do is to make sure that work is being distributed fairly across the organization, and it's critically important that when you make decisions on how work is being distributed, that you actually communicate to the teams about why you're making those decisions. Everybody wants to work on the latest projects and the latest technology, but everyone also understands that you need to have continuity from one project to another. But being able to explain to people why you're distributing work the way you are, and setting expectations for future jobs are essential to having a good solid foundation for knowledge sharing and teamwork across the team. Working principles. We'll talk about that in the next chart here. So I'll just leave that to saying that my belief is working principles are essential, and they have to do with the behaviors you expect in an organization. Next is leadership buy-in. And it is really clear that you can have a lot of great ideas, but they're not going to get implemented if you can't get your buy-in from not only your direct reports, but the key influencers in the organization. At individual contributor level and at first level management here. So working hard to understand what it takes to get buy-in is really essential to developing the right culture in an organization, and to have your directions be taken into play and deployed in the organizations. So that's kind of the puzzle of the circle of excellence that I try and use to help in building global teams. So one of the comments that I just mentioned earlier was working principles. So this slide is actually the Baseband and SoC working principles for our one global team working together. What I'd like to do is call your attention to some symbolism as opposed to the words. So first, if you look at the center, the picture in the center, it depicts a wheel. And if you look at all the arms coming together, think of them as the spokes of a wheel coming together to the center. The wheel only rolls smoothly when all of the spokes are in place and are anchored to the center and supporting the external of the wheel. Second, when you look at the combination of what is inside the circle, you see that first you have diversity of gender, as well as ethnic and cultural diversity, representing the fact that the way the wheel works best is when you engage all of the perspectives of the people possible to make the best solution. And we'll talk more about that later. The next part here at the bottom are what the actual Baseband and SoC working principles are. And I'll just briefly go through them. But the key thing is for an organization is to develop them from the bottoms up with the buy-in of the people. When you do that, then you'll have something that people commit to. These cannot be driven top down. Our organization's key elements are focus on the customer, learn and be curious, continuous learning, invent, shape our future. I mean, we live by invention and technological differentiation. At Nokia, we are at times a bureaucratic company with way too many processes, so we focus on simplification where possible. I'm going to come back to accountability and commitment in a minute. Discuss facts. The points we bring out to our people is it's always good to bring in historical perspectives and points of view, but you must differentiate when you're bringing in a perspective versus the facts. And decisions need to be based on the current facts, augmented by all other relevant information. Sharing is power. I mean, having a lot of knowledge, but keeping it locked up in one location is not a recipe for success. and then every day working hard to earn the trust and respect of the people that you work with and the customers that you supply to both internally and externally. Now, one thing going back to accountability and commitment that I want to highlight, and this was an interesting finding back about 10 years ago. We decided we were going to put the working principles for my organization at the time into all the native languages of our business and what we did, mainly to show inclusion. But one of the things that came out that was really, really interesting was when we went to the French translations over here in the corner. And one of the things we found was the fact that the word accountable and the word responsible both translated to the same word in French. And I'll butcher the French, but être responsable et engagé. And the words commitment and engagement translated to the same word in French. So what this resulted in was a very deep conversation between the different groups of the nuances of the differences between accountability and responsibility, and how you could determine that people were truly aligned on accountability if the word they were using was responsable. And it really helped get a common understanding of what we were trying to achieve. And so since then, we've always translated these working principles into the local languages. We require that all the organizations have a discussion in the local language along with a person of that cultural background that is also a proficient speaker of English, but that their native language is the local language. So we can focus on the nuances of the meaning behind all of the words. And I think from my perspective, it's helped really to drive better unification of the teams as we've gone forward. Okay, talking about commitment, one of my favorite charts that I share with all the teams has to do with levels of commitment. You can ignore the bottom part of the chart here. Let's just focus on the top three, levels 5, 4, and 3 of commitment. This to me is one of the major areas of alignment between high context and low context cultures, soft commitment and hard commitment. Everybody asks for a level 5 commitment. When they want you to put a product out on schedule, it's always, I want you to guarantee you're going to do it. They always want the yes, it's as good as done, whatever it takes. Many times what you get in return is really a level 4, an if then or a yes unless, which we call kind of a conditional yes or conditional responsibility, or a 3. I'll try and I'll give it my best shot. But what's really interesting to me in a high technological company and environment, it's very hard for anyone to give a level 5 commitment because there are so many dependencies and so many things that are outside of their control that it's almost impossible to guarantee delivery. But what I tell my folks in the teams is we must have a level 5 attitude of commitment. And what I mean by that is it's really clear that I will have a challenge delivering a piece of software or hardware to downstream to the next customer if the dependency I have with another organization isn't met. But there are two ways to handle it when that happens. One is you can say, organization A was 2 weeks late, so I'm going to be 2 weeks late and I've still met my commitment. The other way to handle it is, okay, organization A is 2 weeks late. I'm going to do everything in my power to eliminate that gap and still hit the schedule. I may not, but I'm going to approach it as if my goal is still to hit the original date that I have. And that's what I call a level 5 attitude of commitment here. You really have a problem in an organization if you're down around level 3, where people are talking about giving it their best shot and highlighting all of the obstacles in a way that you're getting the perception that these are excuses not to be able to succeed. And I find that the communication mismatches on the level of commitment is one of the most negatively impacting things that can happen in an organization. And I share this chart with all of the teams, and I tell them to have a very rich conversation around an attitude of commitment and the differences between level 4 and level 5 commitments. And I expect nothing lower than a level 4 from an ability to commit, and nothing but a level 5 on an attitude of how to handle the commitment. So how do you achieve leadership and with project in both a project team or an organization with less blind spots? So there's really it's a path through 4 dimensions. 1, diversity of representation, which we've talked about already. Second is inclusivity. Ensure that all perspectives are heard. And you have to draw out people who are participants, but generally less likely to volunteer for their perspective. So it's your job to make sure that you have an inclusive environment that's not only inviting for people to participate, but it's also an environment where you're actively pulling in the people who are not normally participating. Next, make sure that the dialogue is very rich. Do not allow in your dialogue an end state that is, we agree to disagree. I see that happen occasionally in an organization, but you must always set up what are the next steps that we need to do to get to an agreement or to get to a set of options that can be chosen by management on a path forward. And then when you do that, you will reach a level of understanding. And how do you get to understanding, ensuring effective understanding? And that's through communication in the way that people best are set up to receive the communications. I mentioned in my introduction a tool from Insights and Discovery, which I use, and it's a fantastic tool to be able to identify not only your strengths and your particular preferences, but those of other people. And then it gives you tips on how to make sure you're communicating effectively with people that are opposite of you. I happen to be a person that's very strong. They do it by colors. I do it by very strong in red, which is control, followed next by a very strong yellow for teamwork. With next is data for me, which is a blue, and then green for engagement. And so it teaches you a lot about how do you effectively communicate with people that may have more higher focus on engagement and data as opposed to control and teamwork. So I highly recommend looking up the Insights Discovery tool if you're interested in that particular area. Now, some of the things that I like to do when I do leadership sessions inside Nokia for young promotees is leave them with a few of acronyms to remember, because Lord knows when you go through these things you forget 90% of what people tell you. So here's an example I use of becoming an aware leader, and the acronym is SOAR. And I tell everyone that you need to soar in every meeting that you're involved in. First is the S for sense the surrounding atmosphere, interacting with the leader. Is it an environment of energy? Is it an environment of anticipation, or is everybody ready to go to sleep? Next, observe the leader closely. Take a look very closely at all the things, not just the words that are coming out, but the body language, the presence, and we'll talk more about presence in a minute. And then use the A and the R. A is to absorb and potentially reuse all the behaviors that work. I'm always looking for what additional tools I can put in my tool chest to become a better leader for my team. And the one that's as important as the A is the R. Refrain from replicating behaviors that do not work. I tell everyone when I'm up in front of them, I said that there's probably a few good things and tips that you can take away from me, but I know I've got a baggage of some behaviors that aren't that great, and I hope you make sure you notice them and refrain from using them. Another one for what does it mean for the leaders, and a simple equation, and it's around capability and motivation. And the example that I say is P equals C times M, and that's power of the organization equals the capability times the motivation. I had one young director come up to me one day and he says, "Bill, you're underemphasizing motivation. It really should be C to the nth power." But these are the things that I wake up thinking about every single day. And how do you maximize the power of the organization? How do you focus on making the capability of the organization the maximum? This has to do with the inter-organization effectiveness between the teams, the competence development of the teams. Do you have the right skills today? Will you have the right skills in the future? Are there gaps? And I and my direct reports focus a lot on the operational aspects of improving the capability of the organization. But that alone is by no means going to guarantee success. You have to focus on the motivation of the organization. It is pretty clear over the years of watching organizations perform very poorly when motivation was down, either because the stock price was bad, or we've had layoffs or other disappointments. And getting the motivation up really does accelerate the overall power of the organization. So for me, capability and motivation are two things that every leader needs to focus on, and it needs to be able to be translated and deployed in the most effective way for the local cultures that you have in the different locations around the world. So as we're coming to the end here, I want to focus on my 5 P's of behavior. So this is an interesting set that I actually got the first 4 P's. I actually got fell in love with them back probably about 30 years ago now. In my youth, I was a high school and junior college basketball official, and one of the activities we had was our local interpreter wanted to convey to officials a way very simple to remember about how do you be successful in officiating. And he came up with presence, prescience, persistence, and perseverance. And I took those and I adapted them to my team in engineering and have kept them ever since. And a good colleague of mine, a good friend, said, "Bill, you're missing a 5th P." He says, you have to do all of this with passion. And I totally agree with him on that. So let's talk about the 5 Ps and what do they actually mean for an organization. So presence, recognize that you're a role model and your behavior is constantly being observed. Act as you would want to see a leader of your organization act, and exude personal ownership, and you'll foster similar behaviors from your people. So two little anecdotes for me on this. First, when I was a young individual contributor engineer, I still have a decent sense of humor, but I used to love to tell jokes and things. But what I noticed was that the jokes that were really funny as an individual contributor, and some of them were on the company operations, did not become funny once I became a manager. And I really learned in a short period of time that as being a manager, I was viewed totally differently as an individual contributor, and started to understand that I needed to be a role model in my behavior and adapt my behavior in a way that it gave the best perception to the organization. And sometimes you fail in your in doing that. And what I say on all of these is I aspire to do these 100% of the time, but if I'm lucky, I'm north of 80%. The second thing I'd say about this with presence is, especially as I went up in management and learned that I was going to be in front of the teams way less frequently. When we were allowed to travel before COVID, I was in almost all of my locations 4 times a year. And one of the things you notice is that if you're around people and they know you all very well, and you have a misstep, you can always kind of fix that if they know you well or they realize that it is a discontinuity or an exception from what you normally are. But when you're seeing people only like 3-4 times a year, and you do something that is not correct in terms of your presence and being a role model, that tends to stay a lot longer because the people don't know you. So you must have a real sensitivity around effective leadership from being a role model. Prescience, anticipate the future. Proactively look for roadblocks before they cause critical problems. Look for linkages between groups and activities and anticipate integration issues. In the context of this talk, I focus more on the linkages between groups and activities, because that's what's important to building a global unified team. Every program manager will always try and look at what they can do to avoid a problem in a project, but leaders need to take a look at anticipating what is not going to work well between organizations and intervene to address that before it becomes a serious problem. Any underlying discontent between organizations across global boundaries, if not addressed appropriately and quickly, always get worse. And that's been the rule over the years. So you can never just say it'll get better with time. You must always look for these the problems with linkages and work to fix them. Next area is the area of persistence. One approach fails, create another, innovate, innovate, innovate. And one of my favorite books over the years has been The Oz Principle by Connors, Smith, and Hickman. And they've got a quote that I ask people whenever we're in challenges is, how do I overcome my circumstances to achieve the outcome I desire? It's a continuous mentality of looking at when one approach fails, what do I need to do to come up with another angle? How do I look at a problem from a 360 degree perspective? And this is one where really engaging all of the capabilities of the people in the organization, bringing in the gender diversity, the cultural diversity, the way to look at problems differently is really important. I tell folks that there was a time years ago when one of my first jobs as a director was I had there were 9 of us, and we were all 9 white males from the New York area. And we either all agreed or we all massively disagreed and talked past each other. And one of the key elements of success as the organizational evolved was adding more diversity of view into this. Our first person that was integrated into the team was a system architect who was a woman from India. Then we had several men come in from Asia, and the dialogue and the discussion changed on how we solve problems. We started to look more from a 360 degree perspective, and I think that's the essence of persistence. And perseverance, this always goes to my favorite Winston Churchill story that he got up in front of a group, was giving a graduation speech, and just basically said, never, ever give up. And that's it in a nutshell. If you get knocked down, you get back up. Very key. No victims, only solutions. So when you have a challenge on a problem, it's not working. Let's not play the blame game. Let's not look and say that one part of the organization is worse than the other. Everyone's in this together. And one of my favorite sayings is that individual success is tied to team success. If you set up a structure in a way that you think you can succeed individually, but the team fails, you are not doing your job correctly. So all focus on no victims, only solutions. And if at first you don't succeed, try again. And passion. You got to come to the job every day with energy, commitment, and infectious enthusiasm. I got asked by one of my supervisors from India about 2 weeks ago about what motivates me, and I said, first of all, I love the technology. I could not have asked to be in a better industry with telecom, with system on chip technology, working 5 nanometer die widths and stuff. It's really cool technology. I said, but the thing that really also motivates me the most, in addition to technology, is this challenge of putting together a global team. I'm an organizational development fanatic, as I said. I look at this as something that really excites me. And when there are problems between teams and organizations, I love to dig in and understand what the root causes of those and address them. But you have to do this with coming with energy, commitment, and infectious enthusiasm. And I said, when I get up on a Monday morning and I can't feel good about tackling the problems, that's when I'm going to retire. And I'm not quite there yet. So on the last slide, pulling this together. So when you look at the 5 Ps and you bring them all together, in the end, the sum of those is a focus on people. And what I'd also always remind you about in leading an organization is that the power of an organization comes from the empowerment of the people in the organization. Enable the people and you'll succeed. If you overly constrain them, you'll fail. Leadership is not about having people follow you or the team because they fear you. It's because they respect what you stand for and they know you'll support them in the tough times. So to me, it's a very passionate focus on organizational development. And I would just say, Good luck to all of you on your career journey, wherever you are, and building unified high performance culture, project, and organizational teams. And I hope you find as much enjoyment in your career and look at these things as opportunities as opposed to challenges to overcome. So with that, I think I will stop there and turn it back over to Dean Beheshti.
Okay, I'll start. I have two questions, Bill, if I may. So I think you touched on it in your presentation, but when you have a team that is spread globally across multiple geographic locations, how do you build trust between the various teams? So if you could just focus on the trust aspect of it, that would be great.
Sure, that is a key point, because if you don't have trust, you don't have anything in this. And honestly, it was easier pre-COVID when you can get the people, the leaders together, and you could do face-to-face, and we would have probably twice a year full team meetings where we would talk about issues between the teams, starting to say, how do we get this in a way that you're all supportive of each other? That's one aspect. Second was the one I mentioned about with the different leaders on the team having global responsibilities. What I tell them is just remember that if you have a global responsibility and you bias the way you approach it to favor your organization, one of your peers is going to do the same thing to you. So there is a little bit of a constructive tension there to make sure that everything is fair. But in the end, I think it gets to one of the points on the circle about fairness of work distribution. When you can clearly, or even if people aren't going to like the decision, when you clearly explain why you're doing things to organizations, whenever there are no hidden agendas, it starts to develop trust. But in the end, the thing that I like, and we talked about the cross-functional teams. You know, it's so easy when you don't see a person's face or they're just a voice over the phone to potentially become critical of the person. Whenever you start to see the people, and whenever you start to work on projects where you have a chance to even have 2 minutes of more personal conversation at the beginning of a meeting when people aren't there, and you start to build those person-to-person connections, that's what's the formation of trust. But I would say it's kind of a platform you build on, but you have to be transparent with people on why you're making the decisions that you make.
Great, thank you for that. And the second question I have is that even though your talk really is applicable to any team, but particularly at Nokia, it's a technically focused team. Even with that, have there been any instances in your recollection that cultural differences impacted positively or negatively the performance of the multiple teams that were working together?
Oh, sure. There's a long list. This is why it makes this an interesting job. But one of the things that's evolved over time, I'll give an example of, is vacation schedule, and I'll use an example from my long ago history on this, as opposed to something relevant, but you'll get the point. So back in, I think, 93, 94, AT&T, before it became Lucent, we acquired a company from Philips, a division from Philips. And that was my first experience with continental Europe. I had worked with the UK before, but not continental Europe. And one of the things that was really interesting was the fact that the vacation schedules in Europe were very interesting. Some countries were July, others were August. So August was practically a shutdown in Germany. And they couldn't understand the way we handled vacations and how they were all spread out in the US. And they also said to us, but that's less efficient because you never have 100% of the team. And we'd say, yes, but we don't shut down the business for a month. But they came to the realization, as very much amongst themselves, with very little prodding, that when we started to have customers, the next wave of customers were in countries in the Middle East, like Saudi and UAE, and then Brunei, places like that out in Asia, that the vacation schedules are different. So they needed to adapt. So I don't say that it caused anything we've had caused long-term continuous problems. It is the recognition of when cultural approaches need to adapt if you have a global customer base, as well as a global a global base of operations between the teams. So, we have now, and it's very well known that July is a very heavy vacation month in Finland. But I've seen even over the last 5 years, it changed from very little participation, ability to have people in the office in July, to a conscious focus on the business must move forward, given we're a global company. And how do we basically structure these vacations in a way that while we're nowhere near 100% productivity, we have the appropriate amount of continuity to go through. And there are lots of other examples, but I think for me, it's how rapidly people identify the potential cultural disconnect in a global environment and adapt to it. And people adapt very quickly.
Great, thank you for that. Sarah, so are there any questions at all that you see? None?
I don't see any questions
Oh.
at this time.
Very good, thank you. So thank you, Bill, for the great talk. Thank you all for participating in the event. My thanks go to colleagues who made this event happen. Dr. Robert DeFazio, Assistant Dean Jane Polizzi, Ms. Carmen Marmo Savinetti, and Ms. Jill Rogers, and Ms. Sarah Hesasta. Please tune in for the next talk, as it will be advertised through the same channels you learned about this talk. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for your time today, everyone.